Thank you for tuning into Advanced TV History, where we strive to elevate the importance of TV women by telling their stories. We know how seeing ourselves on television impacts our own growth and confidence. There's gold and inspiration in the decades of great work by underappreciated, often forgotten, significant, talented women. Thanks for listening and sharing this podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Hey, listeners, let's talk a little bit about the production value of the Judy Garland Show, which aired from 1963 to 1964. The Judy Garland Show brought one of America's, the world's most beloved talent, some would argue, into living rooms every Sunday night. Its season was heralded throughout the press throughout 1962 and 63, though as the date for its premiere drew closer, there was a certain amount of skepticism that Judy might not be up to the task. Research this a little bit and you find out actually that CBS was causing a certain amount of that stir, perhaps goading her or putting additional pressure on her, thinking that, allowing others to think that she wasn't up to the task. Judy's contract with CBS was unprecedented. It gave her rights to cancel the show at any time. Not CBS. Judy could cancel before all 26 episodes had been produced and aired. And each episode was budgeted north of $150,000 in 1962 dollars. That was a lot of money. And it had to be managed by Judy's company, King's Row Production. Yet another challenge. More pressure to create, finally, a success that she technically was the leader of. So this beloved raconteur, this woman with 40 years experience in show business, at least doing what she was told to do, to sing, to dance, to act, with a great sense of humor and stage presence and singing talent, and then what? They proceeded to tell her how to work. They didn't handle the business side of it. She was in charge of handling the business side, and she entrusted it to men who, they disappointed her. We'll talk about that. We do talk about that, actually. Chicago singer, actor, and star of a concert presentation called Get Happy, Angela Ingersoll, and I discuss the aspects of the show's leadership that border, by anecdote, on stupid, incoherent, perhaps a bit sadistic at times, knowing that the CBS executives really didn't want her to succeed.
Because she was at the table. She had all of this experience. Mm-hmm. CBS didn't know how to handle it. And, she was a tiger, and she knew financially that this had to be a success.
Right.
And they had put her up.
Very much needed.
They had put her up to needing to deliver something that I think reading all the books and reading so many firsthand accounts, it really seems as though she was very focused on delivering a success.
Judy crafted great successes of shows for her live shows in front of live audiences. And I think part of the problem with the television show, where there are a lot of quote-unquote television experts in the room telling Judy, well, what you know how to do isn't relevant in this format. We are going to turn you into a TV star, as if her information somehow didn't translate. And
we've all heard that before, haven't we? We've been told.
Goodness, yes. And what fascinates me watching the show is how it's a completely different format from week to week. They kept trying new things. They would try to bring on a comedian sidekick. They would try to make Judy the girl next door. They would try to make Judy the straight man and not the comedian. They would try to write all of these sketches. They failed at letting Judy be Judy. At letting Judy be in charge. If you remember, the entire point of why we have a series is because of her great rapport with an audience by herself on stage, live in concert, singing the great songs. And they got away from letting Judy just stand and deliver.
In other episodes from this Judy Garland season of Advanced TV History, we go a bit more in depth into just what horrible attitude, sexism, defeatist, sadistic attitude that CBS executives had toward Judy as a person. Coin Stephen Sanders, who is a veteran Hollywood reporter, he was with the Hollywood Reporter, actually, and an author, in his book called The Judy Garland Show, Rainbow's End, which served as an absolute backbone for the research that I did along with many other books about Judy's life, the whole life, but this is a book just about the series. He offered up firsthand accounts provided over the years by a whole lot of people who had been associated with the show. And it documents the continuous second-guessing, the unnecessary criticism, and the pervasive no confidence that was had in Judy's abilities.
And CBS at that time was the Tiffany Network, in part because what was delivering for CBS? Green Acres, the Beverly Hillbillies, and
so they wanted
Petticoat
more
Junction.
Hunky-dory comedy up there. And they put Jerry Van Dyke on the show with her. And there's just, in my opinion, no chemistry there, you know? They forget Judy's a great vaudevillian. Judy was a clown. That's why she was so appealing on stage. She had the old school charm of an Al Jolson, somebody that simply had a childlike sense of play.
And the
on
presence
stage.
of timing.
Yeah.
Her timing. I mean, Betty White has that timing, and it takes years and years to develop. And Jerry Van Dyke was fairly. I mean, what he had going for him was that he was Dick Van Dyke's brother.
Yeah.
And the Dick Van Dyke Show was taking off with.
And he's throwing a lot of enthusiasm at the wall and seeing what sticks. Yeah. And it's rather unfortunate, I feel like, to watch him just desperately paddle at comedy and make lots of big splashes. And Judy's supposed to stand there in the middle and be the straight man, when really she was such an extraordinarily great, witty raconteur and hilarious artist in her own right. Just let Judy run the show, and you're going to have a funnier show.
Amen. Just let Judy sing and be herself, and you'll have a better show. Wouldn't that have made sense? Whenever that was allowed to happen, the show put one more gem in the treasure chest, that which we can hold dear and see on YouTube or on DVD. Let's talk a bit about some of Judy's most noteworthy guests.
We're going to get back to the guests who were on. In particular, Angela talks about Lena Horne. There was Barbra Streisand. There was Diahann Carroll. There was
Ethel
Merman, Bert Lahr, and Ray Bolger.
Bobby
both
Darin.
coming out of The Wizard of Oz.
Right.
Just tell us a little bit more about the favorite guests. You don't have anybody impersonating any of these guests in your show, correct?
Not yet. I do have friends who do sing some of these catalogs of these great artists, and maybe we will join our forces.
Liza and Lorna and Joey, Judy's three kids, were all guests.
Right.
Bert Lahr, Ray Bolger.
From The Wizard of Oz.
How about those guests?
Well, the executives' biographies were very critical of Judy's behavior with her guests, saying that she touched her guests far too much, that she was too intimate with them, which is funny and silly. It didn't seem proper to them, but she's particularly touchy-feely, in my opinion, with Lena Horne, because my goodness, what a fascinating and gorgeous human being Lena Horne was. That was one of the talents that really I think Judy deeply, deeply admired. It was a singer that she would listen to on her own pleasurable time. And there weren't many that met Judy's standards that way, but Lena Horne certainly was one. So Judy and Lena singing together is a real dream come true for me.
And that's what makes this series such a time capsule.
Yeah.
Capturing those very few moments that we will ever be able to see of her actually singing in a high quality, preserved forever
right with
video
other
file.
Great artists of the time. Lena's certainly a great one. The most iconic, I think, that most people think of is Barbra. Barbra was the next best thing coming up and really replacing Judy as America's great belter, America's great singer, and Judy made room for her at the table, even with a little bit of perhaps jealousy there. But when they sang together, when they sang that "Happy Days Are Here Again, Get Happy" duet, though much of the music on that show was orchestrated by the great Mel Torme, it is my understanding that that great mashup was Judy's idea. She came up with that medley in her head. She hummed it to Barbra and said, "I want to do this." She hummed it to Mort Lindsay, her great conductor, and they put it together for her. But she, was a really, really, really creative musician and artist, and she knew how to make both Barbra and herself look their very best and have a great meeting of their talents, so that it didn't seem like they were just two women in competition who were going to outbelt one another.
Right.
They did something really, really thoughtful and artistic and really heartfelt together, which now audiences cannot get enough of.
Where to begin? Judy's guests can be categorized three ways. There was her family, there were emerging talented performers, and then there were blue chip stars like Mickey Rooney, Ethel Merman, and Count Basie. First, let's talk about her family. By 1963, Liza Minnelli was 17 and involved in London theater. Lorna and Joey Luft were 10 and 8, give or take, respectively, and they were the younger ones living with Judy in California. Now, without getting too far into a Garland biography, listeners, know that as a child of vaudevillian performers herself, Judy's childhood was well spent on small stages, first in the Midwest and then California. They lived out of a trunk, which is the basis of her little vignettes where she tells stories while standing behind a trunk. In her early teens, it was then that she was put under contract at MGM. Somebody had identified her as an emerging singer talent. Interviews over the years, though, reveal a woman who was very cognizant of what she missed in that childhood and her deliberate intention as a mother to create a stable childhood for at least her two later children. Liza grew up in a little bit of a different scenario, and Vincent Minnelli, her father, took tremendous care of her. One episode featured Liza as a named guest. And so this is Judy setting up an emerging performer with all she had, as well as showering her own love language on her daughter. And how did Judy do it? Big, of course, by opening the show with a song, Liza, written for Liza, surrounded by Liza's childhood pictures, huge, like 10 feet by 30 feet or something. That was later followed by a series of duets with some realistic ad-libbed patter between them.
It's very hard. It's very hard to bawl you out when you're taller than I say, now you should get home on time. You should eat your cereal. Liza, and you're pointing upward. Doesn't make any sense. Lie down.
I'm sorry, Mom, but you see, I do eat my cereal. That's why I got bigger than you.
You're smart, too, eh? I think they'll begin to stare at us in a minute. You think you want to sing?
Yes.
I think so. What do we do? Bob White?
Yes.
Huh? All right, but how long have you been doing this?
12 years.
On this show?
No.
Well, let's try it again. Come on, we ought to know it by now, shall we? Okay.
You know, I can't imagine. To be one of Judy's children meant that at some point a song would be written about you or your mother's love for you. Liza had hers. Judy penned and sang Happiness is a Thing Called Joe as a tribute to Joey. And then there was Lorna. Now, Lorna and Joey were in the audience for nearly every one of the tapings. And Lorna goes on to recount in her memoir a little bit about the show. She had some observations. So she and Joey showed up at all the shows. There was usually a glimpse of them in part of the panning of the audience, and they were either laughing or simply staring in awe at their famous mother. And so in her many interviews about the TV series Years, Lorna Luft frames those moments with tender fondness. She has some other criticisms of her mother, and they are borne out in her memoir. But for all the pain that Judy caused Lorna through her addictions and all of her problems, it seems that Judy had no problem opening her heart with the whole world watching. As Lorna Luft writes in her own memoir, pages 128 and 129, the most memorable moment of the Judy Garland Show for me personally, though, was the night my mother pulled me out of the audience and sang to me on stage. She sang my song, Lorna. The lyrics had been written by Johnny Mercer and the music by Mort Lindsay. I didn't know she was going to do it, and I was so surprised. She sat down on the edge of the ramp near Joe and me, reached down her hand and pulled me out of my seat and up onto the stage next to her. I still have the tape of me sitting there in my little velvet dress and white tights. She held my hand and sang a love song just for me looking into my eyes the whole time. She looked beautiful sitting there that night in a long sequined, cream-colored outfit and diamond and pearl earrings. I gazed into her face and forgot all about the audience. It was just me and Mama and her voice. A pinpoint of light in the darkness. And when she touched my face, I instinctively reached out and took hold of the arm she used to hold the microphone. When she finished the last note, she put down the microphone and reached out her arms, and I crawled into her lap while she held me close. I could dimly hear the applause from the audience as she rubbed my back and kissed me gently on the top of my head. That was Lorna Luft in her memoir. Now, about the emerging talent who wasn't related to Judy, well, let me just say I can only imagine the work assigned to the scout to determine what kind of performers should be booked on the show. Given Judy's known self-esteem issues, as well as musical stylings, as well as her status as a legend, this is a pretty intimidating proposition. Each guest who was just entering their own spotlight needed to be poised and have his or her own set of pipes.
Good evening and welcome. We've got a very exciting evening planned for you tonight. We've got marvelous people such as Barbra Streisand. I think she's nice and she's got such poison. We've got to start that again. I think it's my fault. I'm sorry.
Enter such names as Diahann Carroll, Robert Goulet, the Smothers Brothers, and Barbra Streisand.
I must say that we've got all your albums at home, you know, and you're so good that I hate you. I really hate you. You're so good.
Oh, Judy, that's so sweet of you. Thank you, you know. You're so great that I've been hating you for years. In fact, it's my ambition to be great enough to be hated by as many singers as you.
Well, that's a nice thing for you to say. I love it. Say more.
Oh, I love you. I love you too, but don't stop hating me. I need the confidence.
No. And if you ever get a little, feeling of lack of security, call me on the phone and sing a couple of notes to me, and I'll give you hatred like you've never gotten. It's good. See, I love you, pussycat.
I think that makes me happy.
Let's try it.
It seems like an odd exchange, don't you think? As there were never women assigned to be writers on the show, it's pretty certain that men wrote these lines. And had they been women writers, I'd venture to say that the patter would have been more positive and supportive. But instead, writers, and there were many of them, were going for a laugh by framing admiration and affection as a negative or almost as a double negative with these two talents, these two American icons. And this was the best that they could come up with. Because it's funny for women to be negative to each other, isn't it? We just can't have too many nice things said about talented women. Now, over the course of her life, Barbra has written and said very few things publicly about that appearance and about Judy. But what she does say is respectful and alludes to remarks that Judy made to her throughout, the remaining years of Judy's life about the corrosive nature of celebrity life and the harmful effects of certain people in entertainment. So, listeners, while the early black and white appearances of Barbra Streisand, Diahann Carroll, and Lena Horne all make the Judy Garland Show the fascinating time capsule that it is, it leaves you just sort of mesmerized as you watch it. Those performances are the one-of-a-kind offering that Judy made to the world. As difficult as the show became for her, the anxiety, the lack of consistency and continuity in the format and all of it, she still gave us those gifts. And that's where her talent was strongest, singing with this emerging talent. Streisand is now an icon and a household name of her own. Diahann Carroll, singer and actor who took TV by storm in the mid-'60s as the star of Julia, which was the first modern sitcom about a black woman, widowed, single working mother. And then there's Lena Horne, whose tenacity and talent was comparable at that time to Judy's. Lena Horne was an American singer, dancer, actress, and civil rights activist whose career spread across film, TV, and stage for 70 years. This is a comparable career. And she got her start at the Cotton Club, became a nightclub performer, and landed in Hollywood for small roles because, of course, she was a woman of color. And that's as good as a Black woman could get in the late 40s, was some bit part. Like so many in Hollywood, however, she became a political activist, Lena Horne did. And she was blacklisted during the time when many in Hollywood were accused of being communists. She was brought up before the House of Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, as it's known. Horne and others didn't work in Hollywood for years. Like Judy, Lena Horne returned to her singing roots and participated in Dr. King's March on Washington in August 1963, which Judy did not participate in, but only because the show at that point in time was consuming her schedule. So, August 1963, just months before Lena Horne taped her show with Judy, she had been part of this massive movement, this moment in American history. Lena Horne was big. Now, listeners, remember that this was a time when movie stars were only seen on the big screen, generally speaking. There was little crossover between TV and the movies. And that's where talk and variety shows, and even in the early game shows like What's My Line, exposed Americans to those biggest names in show business, the ones that they had seen on the big screen. So for a big name like Judy to bring along Ray Bolger and Burt Lahr, her old co-stars from The Wizard of Oz, for the emerging comic Bob Newhart or Tony Bennett or June Allison and Ethel Merman to be in her audience or on her stage, well, that was her cachet. That was Judy holding court. At 41, she knew nearly everybody in the business, and with her star rising again, everybody wanted to be near her. The variety show aspect of the show, the format aspect, was awkward because the writers were trying to conceive of material that leveraged Judy's sense of humor, and these were men writers. They walked a strange line between making Judy seem approachable and everyday and common, like Hollywood had tried to do with her 20 years prior. But then there was this more sophisticated image that was projected in throughout the series, the show. Her name was spelled out in big light bulbs. There were these minimalist, very cosmopolitan sets, and she was wearing a stunning wardrobe. How do you balance that? No, that would frustrate me. Moreover, Judy's connections were A-list, and she was willing to invite anybody that it would take for her to have the best lineup of guests for her show. A lifetime in show business and a comeback on national TV, it's not hard to see potentially great fun shows that should have happened, if only they had let the woman with the relationships lead the way. Now, it's important to think about the audience because 2 generations factor into what would have been Judy's natural audience demographic. The greatest generation, which are those folks born between 1910 and 1924. So they were the ones who would have fought in World War II, would have possibly been alive during World War I and the Depression. They were Judy's peers. And then there's the silent generation, those born between 1925 and 1945, those who were kids during the Depression, to whom Judy is known not so much, well, she's known as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, as she's known to everybody, but she was also the girl next door interest in the Andy Hardy films of the late 30s and the early 40s. These were the years when MGM was cranking out hundreds of movies every year within the structure of the studio system, air quotes. And that was that actors were on contract to be in movies, X number of movies. And in many cases, these movies kept them working long days. And if they were popular movies, then basically as soon as they got done putting one to bed, they fired up another one. And so these performers, these actors, worked long days, which turned into weeks, which turned into months, which turned into years. And so how do you get your popular performer to be ready for the next movie in that series, of that popular series, and make more money for the studio? That That grueling schedule can only be performed if you're on methamphetamines, of course. Now, not quite the meth we know of today or anything that involves a chemistry set in a trailer, but rather it was crazy amounts of Ritalin, literally crazy amounts of Ritalin, combined with smoking and drinking. So in a sense, you had many, many performers, many directors, many writers, literally taking this dopamine cocktail. The adults, they had adult brains. Judy Garland had a teenage brain when she started on this. It's no wonder that she never could withdraw. So how does this story factor into the lineup of Judy's guests? It's because the one that she felt best about and the most comfortable with was Mickey Rooney. And you remember that Mickey Rooney was part of, he was Andy Hardy of the Andy Hardy series. And together they starred in 8 movies from 1937 to 43. And these were movie musicals. It was pablum, basically. Young people first love. And each story revolved around Mickey's character, with Judy stealing the scenes because she was awesome. She was a force. And it was a friendship that started that never waned in 25 years. She married 5 times, never to Mickey. And in the early 60s, he too was on his 5th marriage. So when Judy, in 1962, 63, is starting to make a list of who she wants to have her help launch her show, Mickey was at the very top. Further, she knew that she was doing him a favor to boost his career, which at the time was flagging a bit. Parts were few and far between, and in fact, he had recently declared bankruptcy. I am fascinated by what the audience must have thought of seeing these two do a series of vaudeville-style bits just for a brief moment right in their own living rooms. That which had been part of their childhood was now right there with them on a Sunday night. And of all the child stars of that day, some had risen and some had fallen. Rooney was almost invisible. Judy Garland was on her comeback. Elizabeth Taylor in the early 60s had continued her mercurial rise and was also into her 4th husband, I guess, 5th maybe. And then you had names like Jackie Cooper, Jackie Coogan, Robert Blake, Benita Granville, and they had all faded, at least temporarily. And at that time, if you were sitting in your living room in the 60s and you were watching Mickey and Judy on TV, you didn't know what their working conditions had been like at MGM, what expectations had been foisted on them to weigh a certain amount for the sake of the camera. All you knew was that in the fall of 1963, Judy Garland looked fantastic at the age of 41, and that Mickey at 43 looked less so. So there's this 10-minute bit that included comedy and singing and reminiscing, and Mickey is decked out as Andy Hardy, and literally the two just pick up the story where they left off. Only this time, Judy comes across even stronger as a grown woman who still doesn't get Andy Hardy's credit or affection.
We did an awful lot of pictures together at that, didn't we, Judy?
Yes, we did. We did that.
And songs?
About 8 million.
Yeah, I'd say at least 8 million songs. Yeah.
Here we are together again?
But you know, when we did the pictures, we were never really together. I mean, in the sense, like, we were never together. You know what I mean?
You were always too busy for me.
You're darn tootin'.
The clip is on YouTube. See the link in the show notes if you want to see the whole 10 minutes. It is precious. And I believe that a woman viewer, knowing this history, is going to see something very different, perhaps, than what men do. Coyne Sanders, the author of the preeminent book, the foremost book on the series, interviewed Bill Hoban, who was one of many men involved in the series production, who helped piece together 20 years after the show, the details that made it such a treasure. And so Hoban recalls for Sanders the week leading up to that historic first taping with Mickey Rooney as a guest. Here it is on page 94. The first reading wasn't a reading. We just sat there while they reminisced, Hoban remembers. And it was wonderful. It was one of those great moments. I wish we had recorded it. The one thing I remember of it more than anything, amidst all of this reminiscing, was Mickey saying to her, "You know, We should have married each other. We'd be better off. Hoban goes on, they were talking about doing 3 pictures at once, being worked to death, sent out on publicity tours, how Louis B. Mayer would force them to take pills and stuff. But it was a wonderful reunion, just sitting there, listening to them talk about all the things that happened in the Metro days. Now, in Sanders' book, Frank Waldman, on page 95, says she was obviously nervous about the whole thing, and he was the ideal guest to keep her happy and loose and laughing for that first episode. Later in the book, Sanders mentioned that there was this ongoing chatter that Rooney was actually being considered for multiple appearances in the series in that first season. But in the end, he was only on 2 of 26. Sadly, it was only chatter, this idea that Rooney was going to have a greater presence. Because I have to say that 55 years in the rearview mirror, with the array of stories collected by Sanders and others about the tremendous control that CBS executives asserted over the series and its production, it would not surprise me that a conscious decision was made to greatly minimize Mickey Rooney's presence in the show. Keep it to 2 appearances. Keep Judy on edge. Without the one person who she knew could help her manage her talent and her temper and her demons in a way that would, in a more likely fashion, deliver a superior performance. Legend has it that Garland was fearful, almost paralyzed, heading into that first episode. Yet the entire series of songs and bits, which was an entire episode, 60 minutes, or minus the cigarette commercials, the entire series of songs and bits only required a single take each. Doesn't that sound like a recipe for success? The Judy Garland Show is such a rich one-season series for so many reasons. It's available on DVD, not as entire episodes, but rather the best bits with the most renowned guests. DVDs also include vintage commercials for Contact Cold Medicine and cigarettes. Listeners, we don't get to the civil rights movement, to Stonewall for the LGBT community, to Woodstock, the ERA, and Title IX without first crossing the bridge that Judy placed between the old way and the new. Listeners, this has been a great topic to transition to a season format. Judy Garland, there's just so much to think about. The decision to go in this direction is largely due to the enormous feedback I received from you, saying that what makes Advanced TV Herstory so distinct from other podcasts are the moments when we take a close view of TV herstory and then see how it connects to today. That's the blend of sociology, gender studies, history, and business that few other podcasts offer. So no matter how you came to listen to this episode or any of the past episodes, know that you can find us other places as well. We try hard to make our work available for convenient listening, and you know we'd be incredibly grateful if you'd take a few minutes to share this show with someone who might enjoy this fresh take on Judy Garland. Even more so if, in sharing this podcast, you open the whole door to podcasts, which really are just audio programs, like listening to the radio, sort of, to someone who otherwise finds the idea of listening to a podcast to be complicated, downright intimidating. Help that person. As a matter of fact, just say to them, find the Just Press Play button of Advanced TV Herstory at the tvherstory.com website. Or go to Pandora and search Advanced TV Herstory. We're even on YouTube. On social media, you can find us. Our Twitter handle is TV Herstory, and on Instagram, Advanced TV Herstory. And as always, our email is advancedtvherstory@gmail.com. For this important season on Judy's show, The 60s Judy, we owe a great thank you to Angela Ingersoll. She brings her love and knowledge of Judy everywhere, including our studio here in Chicago. Such tremendous energy and heart. We wish her the very best as her show, Get Happy, builds its audience, travels the country, And we really hope to have her back here at Advanced TV Herstory for more fun. If you want to know more about the Judy Garland Show, the series, I highly recommend Coyne Stephen Sanders' book, The Judy Garland Show, Rainbow's End. I've quoted Sanders' research and direct quotes from that book, though all those interviews that are now going on 30 years of age. Wow. We're coming up on the anniversary of The Wizard of Oz and of Judy Garland's series. A lot of really great stuff out there. Okay, as we leave and finish this episode of Advanced TV Herstory's look at the Judy Garland Show, I have to, of course, give credit behind the scenes to two people who make this show what it is. Jen Eads of Brassy Broadcasting, who serves as audio editor, and Catherine Yang, who is associate producer and video director. Very talented, true believers in the work we're doing. And that background music, that's Jazzer's Take Me Higher, which you can find at freemusicarchive.com. I leave you with this. In 1963, Judy Garland said in an interview, "You really want to know why I'm tackling a weekly television series? Because CBS is letting me be myself, letting me be a whole, total, complete person." Listeners, be yourself. Be whole. Give it your all. Thanks for listening, and thank you for recommending us to others. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.